Serial dating is a term used to describe people who are always going from one brief relationship to another and never settling down. Somebody who is with somebody for a very short period of time discovers what's wrong with that person and then moves along to somebody else. It's not a brand new phenomenon, but it is something that's been exacerbated by technology, with computer dating and apps making that an enabling sort of technology for some. I'm not knocking that entirely because Dina and I met through Match.com. But with some, it can lead to developing bad habits. It's also something that's not necessarily new. The poet Maya Angelou wrote about something similar to this phenomenon in her poem, Here's to Adhering. These are the words. I went to a party out in Hollywood. The atmosphere was shocking, but the drinks were good, and that's where I heard you laugh. I then went cruising on an old Greek ship. The crew was amusing, but the guests weren't hip, and that's where I found your hands. On to the Sahara in a caravan. The sun struck like an arrow, but the nights were grand, and that's how I found your chest. An evening in the Congo, where the Congo ends, I found myself alone. Oh, but I made some friends, and that's where I saw your face. I have been devoting all my time to get parts of you out floating, still unglued as yet. Won't you pull yourself together for me once? Angelou is describing somebody who is unable to find that perfect mate, finding a quality in this person here or that person there, and not getting them all together. When it comes to what inspires somebody to do that, it varies depending on the individual. But there are some people, I believe, who engage in this type of practice because they're looking for something more than companionship and compatibility. They're looking for someone who possesses what no human being possesses: perfection. They're looking for someone that has all of the things that they are looking for and none of the things that they don't want. They're looking for somebody who is without flaw and without blemish, who will be able to anticipate their every need. And they're looking for something more than that. They're looking for someone who can fulfill a void inside their heart that will make them feel complete and whole and never have to search for anything again. What they are doing is they are searching among mortal human beings for something we can only find from God. The writer of Hebrews is a rhetorician in the Greco-Roman form of rhetoric. You have a well thought out speech that is presented here in the Epistle of the Hebrews. And these first two chapters are part proclamation of faith and part poetry. And it talks about who Jesus Christ was and is. Jesus is not someone who, like you and me, came into existence with conception, but someone who existed long before that, at the beginning of creation. Someone who is God, who becomes incarnate and lives among human beings. Someone who shows us an example of righteous living. Someone who lives a life without sin, so that when he dies as a sacrifice for the sins of all. Someone whose love led him to submit to torture and abuse and a horrible crucifixion on a hill without even his own clothes on his back, as the embodiment of God's love for us. And the term that the writer of Hebrews uses to describe the nature of Jesus' sacrifice is perfect. Jesus' sacrifice is the perfect sacrifice and an illustration of God's perfect love. God's love that is much greater than our love. God's love that can give up and take on what we cannot. God's love who is shown in the outpouring of suffering that Jesus endured to save us from ourselves. This is the love that draws us to God. This is the love that surrounds and engulfs us. And it kind of overwhelms us, not in the sense of beating us down or seducing us, but the kind of love that gives us a faith and a trust so that we can completely fall back into the arms of a loving God and surrender ourselves to God's loving care. And the word that is translated as perfect in the 2nd chapter of Hebrews means more than just without flaws. It has to do with a sense of completeness, a sense of wholeness, finding that part within ourselves that restores the image of God's righteousness in which we were originally created. An image and a completeness that expels the darkness and the sin from our lives. It is something that once we find it and once it inhabits us, we appreciate who we are and who God intended us to be. And we live a life of satisfaction and peace. Until times get tough and sin comes back and we fall back into our ways. But God's love is always there, ready to receive us and ready to take us into God's arms. And people who have this kind of relationship with God, people who have found this wholeness and completeness with God, also have stronger relationships with others, those who are close to them and those who are not particularly close. They're able to appreciate what other people can give us, the strength and companionship and the fellowship that we have from one another. They're able to appreciate and distinguish between what we receive from each other and what we get only from God. Today is World Communion Sunday. It is a Sunday where we gather with our brothers and sisters all around the world who worship in many different places, who recite slightly different creeds, and who have a different take on the gospel from one church to another. But today is the day that we come around the table to receive the gifts of bread and the cup, to recognize what we have in common, to realize that when we come to this table and with our hands outstretched willingly receive the morsel of bread and the drop of juice from the cup, we take into ourselves something that is very small but fills a great void within our lives. We come to the table to receive something that makes us whole and makes us complete. The embodiment of the perfect sacrifice of Jesus Christ, embodying God's perfect love. Here is where each of us find wholeness, and it is through the gifts of bread and the cup that the worldwide church becomes one. Amen.